wie es weitergeht. Merci.
Vielmals merci, auch von meiner Seite. Welcome everyone. So we are very happy to start this event today together with you. Who has had already the opportunity to exchange face-to-face with Roberta Metsola? A number of you, maybe 5 or 6 I see. And who has talked maybe to any other of the, let's say, dignitaries of the EU institutions, the higher placed? Okay, that's maybe 30 of you. We can see a very, very active group here. And who has had the opportunity to exchange already with our members of the European Parliament? Oh, that's, I would say, a majority. So I think as your principal has already announced, we would like to start with a very short welcome message by Roberta Metsola. She's on her way here, so it's going to take, I think, another 15 minutes more or less, which gives us the opportunity to maybe organize ourselves a little bit better, because we know that our time will be very short. We might have to already wrap it up around 6 p.m. So I think we need to be very well organized so that the most burning questions will really be addressed. So let's use these 10 or 15 minutes together with our representatives in the European Parliament to prepare ourselves as best as we can. Would we like to start with a short welcoming video?
Happy New Year to everyone. With the European elections in June 2024 will be a decisive year. Your vote matters. It will set the direction of our course and decide on the Europe you want to see. In the past years, we have come a long way. We have been active and decisive where it matters. Today, the European Union is stronger and more united than ever before. But the world is changing. We must keep striving to make our Europe fairer and safer. That was Maria's appeal to me in Lisbon when speaking about her grandchildren. A more equal Europe where everyone can reach their full potential, regardless of who they are or where they come from. A prosperous Europe that, just as I discussed with Paolo, a local entrepreneur in Lecce, can harness the opportunities of digitalization and going green, that can keep people on board. A Europe that listens, that understands, and that delivers. A Europe that is ready to embrace neighbors within the European family. That is what I promised Nadia, a young student in Lviv. But for that, Europe needs you to take part, to voice what it is that you want changed. This will be Europe's year. This must be your moment.
So we can see expectations are high if we want to make this our moment and if we want to make this Europe's year. So now I'd like to invite our current members of the European Parliament maybe to join me here on stage for our introduction to today's event. And I think when you registered for this event, you already submitted some of the questions that you would really like to tackle. So of course, I think there is the current conflict in the Middle East. There is, of course, the ongoing conflict as well in Ukraine. Then we have climate change, we have the influence of artificial intelligence, but also how we would like to, or how we might need to reorganize the European Union for the years to come. And in connection with this, of course, the European elections that will take place now in June. So maybe we can have a short vote and see who would really like to address today. Let's start with the number one topic, I think, from what you submitted was the current conflict in the Middle East. Who would like to see this being addressed today? Okay, I think that is a majority. Who thinks we should in any case also talk about Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine? it's about the same number, I would say, who thinks that we definitely have to address also climate change and maybe the EU Green Deal and the way how we organize our economic growth. Okay, almost as many. Then the other topic is artificial intelligence, the impact of artificial intelligence. Who thinks we should not miss out on this one today? Okay, I have the impression it's getting fewer and fewer with each question I'm asking. But there is this last question of reorganizing Europe, maybe also your role, the role of young people in the EU. Do we need to reorganize the institutions? We know that the European Parliament has called also for an adaptation, a treaty change, which should be prepared already beginning this year, ideally. And together, I mean, of course, the EU elections then taking place in June. And as we can witness, there is the phenomenon of growing polarization, as we can witness in Europe. So who would like to talk about this topic? Okay, I think that's also about 50%. Is there any topic that now I haven't mentioned and that's really burning, that you really want to address today? Yes. I don't know if we have the mics ready, otherwise maybe you can just stand up and talk with a very firm voice. Thank you so much. Who else is interested in the topic of migration? Okay, definitely. Another topic that we haven't mentioned so far, yes?
Taiwan and China.
The crisis between Taiwan and China. Who else is interested in this topic? Quite a few, yes. Okay, sorry. One more topic, maybe? Yes? Marc Angel says the most important one hasn't been mentioned, so we are curious. Yeah, you wanted to mention another one. So education in general. Okay. So this is quite a program for today. Do you have any feedback? Marc Angel, you already mentioned there is a topic we haven't addressed.
There's one topic, I think, which is important, but it has been partly addressed. It's a just transition and fair transition. We are in two transitions, the digital transition and the climate transition, and we have to make sure that the transitions are just, that everybody profits from this transition, and that we leave no one behind. But just shortly, what you mentioned are also the interests, what the citizens had during the conference on the future of Europe, where 1/3 of the citizens, 800 citizens, which were chosen, and we discussed for 2 years, 1/3 of them were between 16 and 25, and exactly the topics you mentioned were also the topics the citizens were very much interested. It's social inequalities and climate change. That was really during that conference, and also treaty change. So I'm happy that I hear the same echo that I remembered from the conference on the future of Europe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Wow. Getting started. Thank you so much, Marc Angel. Martine Kemp, you have joined the European Parliament rather recently. So would you have a message for all of us, something that we really should maybe keep in mind when discussing today with Roberta Metsola? Also listening to the young people and to the subjects that we have mentioned so far.
I think for me, really important is to also hear what you care about and what are your real topics. And so I'm really happy that Roberta Metsola will be here today to answer your questions. And I had already the opportunity to have a few of you yesterday on the screen. So I heard already your high quality questions. And I'm really, really happy that this room is full of people, and I think it's a huge opportunity. We have our future in Europe, we have our future in European Union, and your questions can be the first part to the solutions that we find all together.
Thank you, Martine. Monica, maybe you also have a message for all of us.
Yeah, shortly, because education was mentioned, and I'm an advocate for quality education that is accessible for all. Means also less privileged, people with migrant backgrounds, people with disabilities, visible and invisible disabilities. So equal access to education is key for me, and I think also key for you, for your future. And I'm glad to see that so many young students are interested in what we do in the European Parliament and how the future of the European Union will look like. So I fight for a more equal, a more inclusive, and a more diverse European Union. You mentioned also the fact of migration. All the people that come to us are part of our society, so integration and providing them equal chances is also very important. So that's my point of view, because I'm also very the social one from the liberals and the social one. So inclusion and diversity are key, as well as education.
Thank you, Monica. Isabel Wiseler, which one, among all the topics that we have already now mentioned, which ones would be your priorities?
There is one thing I really want to highlight. It's the defense of democracy. We have the feeling, most of us, that democracy is something we have lived with for so long that it can't not be there anymore. But that's not the case. Democracy is at stake in the world as it is today, from inside and from outside. We had talked about the extremes. I think there was a lot of interest. And it comes also the difficulties from outside. So the authoritarian regimes really try to undermine democracy in Europe. So there would be a few examples I would like to bring up, but perhaps one, when I was young, if anyone had told us that in the United States there would be one day a president who wouldn't accept the results of presidential elections, and that people would go up the Capitol to go into, it's not imaginable. They would say, you are crazy, and you saw what happened. So we have to be strong to know that it's not a given, and that we have to fight for it. The day we stop to fight for democracy, we will lose it. So thank you to be here and to be interested.
Thank you, Isabel, and I'm sure we have quite a number of questions regarding the events and topics that you have just mentioned, and we will have probably time for those questions. Tilly Metz, which would be your introductory message today?
Yeah, of course, all what was mentioned already by you, the topics that are important, are of course very close linked one to each other. But Marc Angel said we need to have an ecological transition that is socially fair. And I'm even saying we will not have social justice without ecological transition. So now it's really about making this message close to the people that we need an ecological transition. We need more independency in the energy sector, in the agricultural sector, in order to have also more social justice. So this is very closely linked one to each other. And one concept, which is also very important to me, is the concept of one health. So the way we treat our environment, the way we treat animals, is also very linked to our human health. We came just out of a pandemic, if I can say. We are not completely out, and the next pandemic maybe is in front of the door if we don't react. So we are spreading zoonosis, so diseases that goes from animal to human beings, also through the intensive agriculture, through transporting, for example, animals throughout Europe. So this is very linked. This is, if we steal more and more the place of wild animals, viruses are also going to jump over to humans. So the concept of one health, the way we treat the environment, air pollution has also, of course, an impact on ourselves. So that's another concept, which is, of course, again linked to the ecological transition, because those who are suffering the most
from the climate change are not those causing the most climate change, but are the most so-called vulnerable people. Well, I talked already a lot, but for me it would be very important also to hear from you, your questions, your demands, and your also fears that you might have regarding the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tilly Metz. Charles Goerens, I think you're devoting a lot of time to thinking about the future of the European Union and its institutions, the way it is organized. Maybe you have a couple of clues for us on this topic.
Yes, indeed I have. 2024 will be a very important electoral year. There will be elections in India, in the United States, in Europe, and in several other countries. And the most important elections this year for the Europeans will be the elections in the United States. The 5th of November, we will see whether or not the European Union will have the United States for the next 4 years as partner when it comes to fight Russia in Ukraine. It will be very important. As member of the AFCO committee, the Institutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, I am involved in the treaty change. We have adopted a resolution at the plenary level by a very small, unfortunately by a very small majority. But nevertheless, this resolution aims at giving the Council the means to trigger Article 48, which means that we will have to change several provisions of the European Treaty. One of them will be Article 7. Article 7, as you know, is an article which foresees that we can sanction a country which is no longer in line with the rule of law. Principle laid down in Article 2. That's very important. And it's very important for one reason, for two reasons. For the time being, the European Union, composed by 27 member states, is not well functioning. And when it comes to enlargement, once we will be at 30, 32, 34, 35, we will have huge difficulties to overcome the divisions already seen in today's world. Let me finish by quoting a former German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, who said the European Union is largely underestimated within its borders and overestimated outside. And that's the real challenge ahead. We have to deepen the functioning of the European Union before enlarging it.
Thank you so much for this round of introduction, allowing us to warm up. I've just been told that I think Roberta Metsola will join us. It's not yet entirely certain when the moment will be, so we do have a couple of more minutes. I'd like to mention also that you can address your questions also in Luxembourgish or in French or in German, maybe also other languages, Portuguese, Spanish, if you feel more comfortable in other languages. We see we are flexible here on stage. And I'd like to mention that this event is being live streamed, so just something to keep in mind when you take the mic. And there's also a camera actually directed at you, so you might be appearing on camera. Do we have any feedback now to our current members of the European Parliament? We have had a first round of feedback from them. Maybe you have one or the other question related to what has been said so far.
Can we ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So you had mentioned the current situation with America, that if Trump gets reelected, we will not have America's support at all if we were ever to start a war with Russia. Do you expect us to start a war in Russia in the near future?
Can you tell us your name, maybe? Just your first name?
My name is Marta.
Marta. Thank you, Marta. Do we have one more question? For now? Maybe you want to keep your questions for later? I'm sure we have one more question. Tilly Metz, you wanted to address a question as well to our students. Yes, of course. And we remember your question, Marta. Okay, then let's answer first.
Yes, I would really like to. I don't expect us to have a war with Russia right now, because Ukraine resisted and is resisting. In fact, what Ukraine has done and the support we have given to Ukraine has set a sign. If you look at what Russia was saying beforehand, and we didn't listen enough, but the Baltic states had told us this is a real risk. We are afraid. We are really afraid. We know they consider us as being part of Russia. And if Ukraine had fallen, they would be the next. They are absolutely sure of that. So the situation is awful, and we have to support Ukraine. On the other side, we have set the basis to be able to resist and to hopefully avoid that Russia in a few years would come with a war we couldn't have avoided. So it's difficult, and at the same time, I think it's hope.
If I can just... I think Europe will never go into a war with Russia, because Europe is a peace project, but Europe will have to defend itself if it's attacked by Russia. Europe will never start a war. So your question was, will we go into war against Russia? No, it's the other way around, but I hope not. We're supporting Ukraine, and Ukraine is defending our values, as Isabel said. So, and Europe is a peace project. Don't forget that.
Charles Goerens,
Yes,
I think you wanted to
obvious.
Compliment what has been said.
Just a few words. We have to act in a way that Ukraine will be enabled to fight against Russia. If Ukraine loses the war, Ukraine is lost. If Russia loses the war, Russia still exists. That's a matter of fact. We have to act in a way to be always in line with the principles laid down in the international order. That's our duty, and we have to try to find allies in order to be more than 27 to defend it. And let me say at the end that it's very difficult to mobilize enough funds to give Ukraine support, unless Biden will be re-elected, and he will have on his side a Senate supporting him by spending more money and to provide more weapons to Ukraine. But it's difficult to say. If we cannot agree on the Ukraine facility aimed at spending 50 billion, if we are still blocked by Orban, then we have to agree on 26 on a loan. That says something about 100 or 150 billion in order to show Ukraine we are on your side, in order to show to Putin you should not underestimate our determination.
Thank you, Charles Goerens. I think Roberta Metsola is approaching, but Tilly Metz, you had a question to all of us.
Yes, no, because Mrs. Metsola is very close. Maybe I just add on the same topic, because I won't hear the replies. But my question, you can write, of course, to all of us, what are your really concrete expectations for the future? That is the large questions regarding Europe, so that you write to all of us, I really want this, or I am not happy about that. I mean, that's very important for us to know, of course. And I think she's very close. Regarding on Ukraine, just very shortly, maybe. I mean, some people ask me, also students, you are a pacifist. How can you be in favor of giving arms and munition to the Ukraine? And then I always said, it's a little bit hypocrite if somebody gets attacked on the other way of the street and you don't help him concretely. I stopped there because now she's really close.
So let's give a big round of applause to our current members of the European Parliament.
Yes, it's Philip who's going to manage to sing afterwards. Dear President of the European Parliament, Ms. Roberta Metsola, dear Vice President, dear members of the European Parliament, dear guests, last but not least, dear students, liebe Schüler, liebe Schülerinnen, a little bit Luxembourgish. On behalf of the community of Lycée Aline Mayrisch, it's with an immense honor and a deep gratitude that we welcome you, Ms. Metsola, to our school today. Your presence is a remarkable moment, marking a significant step in our commitment to European citizenship education. We sincerely value your initiative to engage in dialogue with young people, providing them with the opportunity to express themselves and that they also could ask the right questions. This shows your dedication to the education, to democracy, and to active citizen participation. Values that I would say our school deeply shares. Allow me to put out that Aline Mayrisch was a visionary lady. She was a European ahead of her time, as she played a role in fostering the Franco-German dialogue between the two world wars. By inviting writers, politicians into her home, her visionary spirit would be certainly delighted to see that the school bearing her name is now committed to education in European citizenship. By fostering debate, the exchange of ideas and mutual understanding, we strive to carry on this legacy. Students are encouraged to become informed, engaged, and responsible citizens within the European community. Your presence today reinforces our determination to continue this crucial educational mission. I would say that this school is an MEP school, and we look forward to hearing you, share your thoughts and your perspectives. I would say the floor is yours. We are very excited all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol Schoen. Thank you for your school for organizing this exchange today. We are really happy to have this opportunity again to be able to discuss with you today the most burning issues. As you maybe could see while arriving here, we already had a quick warm-up together with our current members of the European Parliament. Roberta Metsola, you are now the President of the European Parliament since about 2 years, I think, and you were voted as the youngest president ever of the European Parliament. And if you allow, I think it was your birthday less than a week ago, so we can also still say happy birthday to you.
I'm not so young anymore.
Well, we can stay young in spirit, of course. That's the goal of everyone, I think. And we have seen your welcoming message today. You said that we need a Europe that listens, a Europe that understands, and a Europe also that delivers. So I think in the short time that we have today, this is our mission to see in how far Europe already fulfills these tasks. We had the opportunity to screen a little bit which are the topics that we really would like to address today. There is, of course, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, in Ukraine as well. We have already talked a little bit about Ukraine and the role of the European Union, of course, when it comes to these conflicts. But topics like climate change and most of all, I think one of the favorites here in this room was migration and the EU's position and role when it comes to migration that we also, in any case, would really like to address. So maybe we would like to give you the floor to address a couple of words to us as an introduction.
And there was a question and answer.
Right, yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for staying up quite late to hear me out, but I have full confidence in my colleagues who really prepped the scene, although in Luxembourgish I will do it in English. I started organizing events such as these, in other words, where I talk and listen to young people on my very first official visit as President of the European Parliament, which I did to Luxembourg. And I went to another educational institution almost 2 years ago, and I thought that this is a model that works. And I must say that what and there were some very difficult questions, no pressure on all of you, in that session, but I've taken that model to every country that I go to, and it has been fascinating, whether it is in countries where school is in the countryside, in other words, people feel far away from cities and therefore far away from Europe. Imagine Strasbourg, Brussels, really far away. I have been to schools in inner city where you have big disparities between those students who can and those who can't have access to what they believe they should and what we believe we should work towards them achieving in the European Union. I have done a town hall with President Zelensky at the University of Lviv, and I was really encouraging him for us to answer questions, and I can tell you the questions were quite tough there too, also to President Zelensky, so it was a good idea of how we can engage. And I tell you this because one of our biggest challenges as we go into the last few months of a European election, are you all going to vote? Are you all over 18 or no? How many of you are over 18 or will be 18 in June? So you will have the possibility to vote in the European elections in June. You have seen your 6 members of the European Parliament. I know them all very well. They do an extremely hard and good job, and you should be proud of them. And you will be asked in June to select the new 6 members of the European Parliament, those who will present themselves to you, and you will need to place your faith in them to take what will be very difficult decisions. I say very difficult decisions because they might look easy from far away. I can tell you they are not. They could be on climate, where we need to make, let's say, a very difficult balance between how we become the most climate ambitious continent on this planet, while at the same time understanding that the social and economic impact of our measures might hit people more than others. When we talk about jobs and growth, how we maintain our competitiveness as Europe. I was just asked by a Luxembourg journalist what will happen in the case that Trump becomes elected president in November this year. This year is a jumbo year of elections. When we talk about the war, when Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, the European Parliament came together like never before in order for us to help. And are there any Ukrainian students here? In Luxembourg, you were one of the first countries that welcomed refugees. You still have a very high number of people from Ukraine in this country. Well done to how you did it, better than in others, I must say. Well done to really the way you have welcomed this in this society, which is not a big society, a sudden influx of people who are really fleeing war, and you gave them a new life. The recent crisis, war in the Middle East, is really not one, I would say, we were, let's not say we were not expecting it, but let me also say that there was an uneasy ceasefire until the 7th of October, which was broken. And that has meant that for us as a Europe, we've had to look into how we deal with quadrupling, as we've done, humanitarian aid to Gaza, where the situation is absolutely catastrophic. Why we can and how we can, and tomorrow we will commemorate International Holocaust Memorial Day in Brussels in the European Parliament, why we can really look at a situation where 1,400 Israelis and non-Israelis were killed in one day in an abominable terrorist attack, and how we can, looking beyond this immediate, very difficult situation, that fog of war, think about the day after. In other words, how can Palestinians be given a perspective of hope? And how can Israelis live securely, in safety? It is not easy. The situation is now in its many months situation. And if you look at the possibility of escalation in the region, that is something we are looking at very closely. And also the ripple effects that has, and the discussion that is taking place in our societies, and how we as a European Union
could potentially take the leadership in finally pushing forward a way for peace. Are we close to that? No. Do we give up? Never. Because on this continent and very close to us, there are millions of people who feel that they are not safe. And either they are being bombed upon, or they are being attacked, or both. And this is something that we have a responsibility, which is why the European Parliament last week called for a ceasefire. We were the first institution to do that in return for the hostages to be returned. We are calling for other institutions to do the same, because we have a responsibility. So this is where we are. Happy to discuss it. Please ask me questions. This is a very big topic I have in all countries, and people ask me this. On migration, last point, we have adopted a set of laws. You know, I come from Malta. I come from an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, which has long been, let's say, at the crossroads of big migration paths. So we are used to it. But what happened to us 20 years ago when we joined the European Union, so on the 1st of May we will celebrate 10 countries joining the European Union, we found ourselves in a situation where a country like ours was left alone to tackle influxes of people and people drowning in our neighborhood, in our sea. So we have agreed on a set of laws at the end of December, which we will vote on in the Parliament in April, after lawyers have set their work on the laws that we will adopt, which will put solidarity at the core of the package, balancing that solidarity with asylum and protection, while at the same time making sure a returns policy is effective and external borders are secure. Why do I say this? Because what we have lived through, or what we see is the instinct of member states, is to reintroduce internal borders the minute there's something wrong. We did it during the pandemic. We thought that the pandemic was going to stop at the police border control. We did that for years, and I remember thinking the first time, how will this affect Schengen, our free movement that we have fought for so long? Till today, it is still the instinct of member states. And that is not, for me, a solution to migration. A migration policy needs to be holistic. It needs to have all pillars included. It is not perfect. There will always be populists on all sides of the fringes, both on the extreme right and the extreme left of the political spectrum, that will say, no, this is not good. This will be, I will give you one personal example, my 5th European Parliament in June, and there has never been an election where I did not have to go through the very difficult decision of being on a panel with colleagues for whom it is very easy to present a situation that is difficult in black and white. And I refused to do that. I said, I will go for the grey, which is multifaceted, multi-layered, difficult, but I have the responsibility to explain it. And that's what I want to do here. And I hope that you leave this room not thinking, okay, anyway, I need to vote because in Luxembourg it's obligatory. It's one of the few countries where it is. But hopefully that you can go and tell your friends and family that voting is important, not just for a democratic exercise, but because you can influence who will represent you. It's already a good thing that you are here, but think about all of those young people who are not here and who are looking at politics. All politicians are the same, look at them, they're just fighting. It's not true. There's huge difference. And a lot of us have the responsibility to try to do good in this world. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. And when we don't, we need to be honest. And that, I think, is also important, that you put your political representatives to account and hold them and ask them the questions. So I stop here, and then I try to go through the topics that you raised, but please, happy to answer any question. And keep me on time, guys. Okay?
Thank you so much, Roberta, for sharing these initial thoughts with all of us. I think the conflict in the Middle East and, of course, migration were also the highest ranking topics for all of us. So who will be the brave ones to ask the first the first questions? And I see there are many hands already, and my colleagues.
Can you say your name, and we can take two or three questions?
If you can say your first name exactly, and we will try to always go with 2 or 3 questions. If you can tell us your first name and then...
Hello, my name is Niels. Thank you for joining us. It's really an honor. My question would be in regard to the rapid deployment capabilities related to the crisis in the Red Sea. So I think 2 days ago there was an agreement to send warships to that area, and the strategic compass of the EU foresees that by 2025 we will have the possibility to have 5,000 soldiers as capability. My question would be, well, with the shifting responsibilities in the international order that the EU is now in, will the current framework, PESCO, will that really be enough in the future in order to guarantee international security and also the security of our shipping routes? Or would we need to expand upon that and maybe also revise the EU battle group concept beyond the RCS? Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you so much for this very specific question on the Red Sea and for mentioning also very specific instruments and initiatives in place currently. Who else would like to add to this? I see there's a hand over here.
Hi, my name is Ellie. I have also a question on international security, and that would be in regard to the wars and conflicts in the continent. What would the current expectations on European defense, considering a potential entry of Sweden to the NATO after Turkey has given the green light and making Hungary the only country opposing that idea? Thanks.
Thank you. Ali, is that right? Yeah. Ali, yes. And we have a third question over there.
Hello, my name is Sophie. My question will be about the conflict happening in Middle East. How does the Parliament's resolution can secure immediate ceasefire in Gaza? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for this question. Roberta, do you think we can take one more?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Sophia, and I was wondering also about the Middle Eastern conflict. I was wondering, because you said that international organizations are encouraged to demand for ceasefire, just as the European Parliament did. But how can international organizations do that and at the same time support the rights and aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. And one last question for this first round.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your engagement. It is politicians like you, politicians who try to help Europe, who make Europe great and have advanced us to the stage which we are now. Now, I'm going to ask a question which I don't know if you'll like. It's not very heavy, but it's on a theme which not a lot of European politicians might want to answer, especially in this year. It's quite simple. I'm a European federalist. Are you as well?
Thank you, Sam, for this question. So that gives us already quite a variety of questions for this very first round.
Thanks. I was waiting, for the Jeffer of the room to stand up and say, yes, here I am. So, all right, Niels, rapid deployment capacity. Imagine this. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the EPF had never been used before, the peace facility. What happened just in the first few weeks is that the High Representative brought together ministers for defense from all different countries in order to pool in the resources and start by helping Ukraine immediately. It was very ad hoc, trying to see who has what in order for them to be deployed. That has evolved quite a lot. And we've also managed to use EU instruments which would not, of course, qualify as us having a real security and defense union, which is what the Parliament has called for, and if we want to go on, the last question is really the next step to go. In other words, how we can be more integrated as member states, but we have managed to adopt procurement possibilities for production of ammunition on our territory, which is, for example, taking place in Poland and Slovakia, the so-called ASAP. We are using the macro financial assistance to go to Ukraine and countries like Moldova in order to bring them closer to us. The strategic compass was devised before the invasion, before Finland and Sweden joining NATO, and don't underestimate the big impact that that has on the alliance. So what we have done as a parliament is saying, yes, we should have a security and defense union. By far the rapid deployment capacity that we used to think of before the Ukraine war, and now if you see with the actions that are taking place around the Red Sea and making sure that we have possibility as Europe to defend ourselves, because this is in a sense what we are doing in terms of defending the shipping routes, and this is even more important back to the Mediterranean, because what you have at the moment is a 40% dip in the passage of ships that have no choice because they're not insured into entering through the Suez Canal to go around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. So our preparedness is not where we are, where we should be, but I think that since we have learned to work with crisis since the Russian invasion, we have become better adept at using our resources, knowing full well that as a security and defense union and the mutual solidarity clause that you know exists in the treaty will complement and will not compete with NATO. I mentioned Sweden and Finland before. I know Finland well, my husband is from Finland, and you know, this is a 1,400 kilometer border with Russia that has now been, the NATO area has extended to there. And that meant also that this is a highly prepared country in terms of any possible aggression, and I think that also makes Europe more secure in turn. For the question on Sweden, Turkey, good news that last night the parliament ratified. I am optimistic that we will make sure that the last remaining country will come on board. And I will, without, let's say, creating false hope, I'm really, really optimistic we will manage to get all countries, including the last one, holding out. There is the discussion as to whether there should be a negotiation or concessions or anything. Sweden has ruled that out, so, and I think Sweden is right to do so, Ellie. So immediate ceasefire, and how possible is that, right? I'll join your questions. It took long for us to come to get an agreement on the language. I need to see you. Who did I ask? Yes, you. It was you. It took us long to get a majority on that language, and I'll tell you why. One, there are over 100 hostages left, including one baby, to be released. We are at the same time seeing increased violence in West Bank with the settlers, on which sanctions are being prepared. So that is another step that has been taken. So when asked about how are we going to convince, when we called for a pause in hostilities around 1 month ago, and that was before the multiple pauses that were used for the exchange of prisoners on one hand and hostages on the other, we were the precursor to several UN resolutions for that. Now, the UN resolutions are not consistent. Some go as far as us, some do not. Some have not gone as far. And the reason why is because for, let's say, if you're going to talk about how are you going to bring the hostages out, or will the ceasefire be respected? And thirdly, who are you negotiating with? Because at the end of the day, we need to remember there is a democratic country on one hand, and there is a terror organization on the other. I have been to the West Bank. I have not been to the Gaza Strip. The parliament has long asked to have access. We are pushing to have, I mean, at the moment we have, you know, in the approximate, you know, over 1 million people who are on the verge of starvation. I mean, this is a very serious situation. And the border with Egypt is very complicated. Why? Because there is only one. There used to be two. Now it's only one. And where you would have usually around 120 to 150 trucks going in with aid, there are much, much less now in a situation where there is a massive displacement. And these people can't go anywhere. So, of course, what will inevitably happen, and I use the word uneasy ceasefire at the beginning for a reason, because there were tens of thousands of people who were crossing every day, whether for medical, for work, etc. But for those children now there, the reality is that they will grow up knowing with this memory of what has happened. I have also spoken I've been to hospitals in Tel Aviv of people who were at the music festival who were shot there, not soldiers, civilians, ravers, really, ravers, proper. And they said, how will we forget this? You know, and I met a guy who told me, look, I am an Israeli Jew. I was with an Israeli Muslim in the same car. We were both injured, we were both shot at, you know, how can I forget? And it was hard for me to be there to witness. This is a guy as old as my son, you know, that. And in fact, this person has actually been giving quite a lot of interviews and saying, you know, everybody wants this to stop. Yesterday there was a pretty big explosion where 21 soldiers were killed. You know, when you are in a situation of war, it is easy for us here to say, look, you should do this, 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 and that. We called for a ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. That was important last week. But now we need to talk about how we can take a role in convincing others, but also bringing the people who will be responsible for the decisions to be taken around the same table. They're not close to doing that. It is not easy. It's not easy. And I won't even say on either side, because there is a Palestinian population that does not feel represented by Hamas. And that is a reality we need to, I'm not saying that no one feels represented by Hamas or that they're not active there, but there was no other election since then. So it's very complicated. Thank you for giving me time to explain, because it's also one of these where it's easier to do black and white, but this is not a black and white situation. Are you a federalist? Are you recording me? Yes. So, you know, I used to form part, when I was younger, of a student organization that was pro-European. I used to run around Europe, you know, trying to convince people to vote for their country and a referendum to join the European Union. That's how I started 20 years ago, and it has been sort of only Europe ever since. And we used to always have this argument with an organization that would sit right next to us, called the Young European Federalists, as to who was more federalist of us. Whether you tell me everything should be done at a European level because that's what to you is a federalist, I will tell you no. I strongly believe in local politics, and I strongly believe in national politics. But I hate the fact that I keep getting a response that education is completely the remit of member states and therefore European Union cannot try to raise the standards. I hate that. And I would like that if we have learned anything from the pandemic is that we have to have finally a proper European health union. And that after we realized on the 23rd of February 2024 that we were essentially a bunch of energy islands, having preferred to import gas from an unreliable neighbor because it was cheaper than our more reliable neighbor in the form of renewables, I would say, yes, we need a European energy union. So yes to that, but let's not take away from a national member state level the love we have for different traditions, the language we have, the different ways we do this. Because Europe is not about making everybody the same, but it is about making everybody better. And then I think we could agree, but not with a label.
Thank you very much, Roberta, for this first appreciation. So we can see we don't trust cameras anymore. We need to have our own camera. It's the only camera we can...
No, it was a joke. I do that to my kids when they want to sort of see, to record what I say, to remind me what I've promised, so yeah. It's very clever of them. So.
And I've also been told that we don't need to be very punctual and already wrap it up at 6. I think we have until 6:20 at least for our debate. So we still have
mostly, but okay, it doesn't matter.
some time.
We'll see. I'll speak shorter.
Maybe 15, okay. So I think it's time for another round of questions and statements. They can also be very critical, of course. Don't hesitate to also voice
no pressure.
Very critical or maybe views that have not yet been presented.
Oh, my name is Valeria, and I wanted to say that I'm very thankful for what you did to the Europe and to Ukraine in particular. And my question will be, if the majority of the countries agreed to the allocation of aid to Ukraine, but Hungary opposed it, do you think it is right that one country can veto the aid? And how do you see the ways to overcome such situations?
The what, the last bit? How do you see?
How do you see the ways to overcome such situations?
Okay.
Thank you, Valeria, for this first question. We have many more over here, for example.
Hello, I'm Maria, and my question is, so nowadays many young people say they don't follow politics because they don't find it interesting. And how do we intend to encourage more young people to get involved in EU politics and take part in the upcoming European elections? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Over here, Rabea, maybe? Yes.
Hello, my name is Gabriele, and my question is about the China-Taiwan crisis. So how would the EU react in the case of an eventual invasion of China towards Taiwan's territory, knowing that if the EU sanctions China, it could have huge repercussions on the European economy with the great risk of a greater inflation than the one caused by the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriele. Roberta, do we manage 2 more questions?
Or 2, okay.
1 or 2? Yeah, okay.
Hi, my name's Max. My question is about migration. Last year, Manfred Weber spoke about giving him support for building fences on the border at the east of the European Union. And of course, a lot of people compared that to Donald Trump wanting to build a border wall between the United States and Mexico. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Thank you, Sam. And then we will go for one last question in this. Max, sorry. Thank you. That's why we are 2. So one more question over here. Last one for this first round.
Seeing as a Trump win in the presidential elections in the US is not that unlikely, what steps should the EU take in preparation for that, and also what would the consequences be for the EU in specific, and what would the actions of the EU Parliament be? My name is Yun.
Sorry, your name is?
Yun.
Yun. Thank you, Yun, for this very daring question. Okay, that's an even greater diversity.
So Ukraine, veto, we will see next week. We have a special European Council on the 1st of February. I hope that we will find a solution. Also, don't underestimate the capacity of your country and your brave countrymen that have managed to bring unprecedented unity between all member states on an unprecedented number of sanctions packages against an invading country. And that is thanks to an understanding of the political leaders that there was no choice. In other words, this is Ukraine, this is part of Europe, they are fighting our war. But 2, a strong citizen upwards move in all countries saying, we need to help Ukraine. And that put even the most initially skeptical leaders into a position where, yeah, I will do it. I cannot go back to my country and say, I did not help this country that is fighting for my freedom, my values. So how do we find ways to overcome it? You know, you can do soft power or hard power. So you can find ways to negotiate. All negotiations require you to give something and take something. Is it abused sometimes? Yes. Does that mean that you should remove the power for everything? Position of the parliament is yes. If you come from a smaller country, it's a nuanced point of view. So you're not swallowed up by larger countries. I can say it here. I can't say it everywhere. But I would also look at, and I link this with migration, this is an area, a policy area, which is not unanimity. So in other words, you have not needed since 1992, really, the need for all countries to say yes to any law on migration. But somehow we never had the political will to say that. So we've hidden behind individual countries who said, no way do we want a deal on migration, in order for us not to proceed. This time we've managed, we've overcome, and we found a majority in order to proceed, even though there are a number of countries that will not join, but they will have to implement it, huh? They will have to implement it. So the ways are, okay, you have a right to vote against, but then you vote, you implement. And if you don't, we take you to court. And court, you don't want to be, I mean, these are judges who live in Luxembourg. You don't want to have a sentence handed down against you by that court. So I would rather focus optimistically on finding a solution next week, because that's the message that we need to send to Ukraine. And then we will take internally, as a Europe and as a parliament, we are very tough on this. So we're even looking into legal channels, into seeing whether funds that have been disbursed should have been disbursed in return for what we think is a rule of law breach. That is something that is being looked at. But for me, the most important is that we reach an agreement on the so-called Ukraine facility, the 50 billion euros next week, together with, and that's where other countries come in, where they will ask for additional funding on migration, on solidarity measures in case of natural disasters, etc. Youth that are not interested, well, talk to them, Maria. I think for a long time we didn't talk to anyone, really. You know, I can see it, I've seen it, that we were under the impression that, look, we come from a traditional political party, I'm a Christian Democrat, that one is a Social Democrat, that one's a liberal, perfect, hunky-dory. Our voters are very happy with us, no matter what they will vote for us. No way. What has happened and what we saw happening year after year is that a growing number of frustrated voters felt that we were not talking to them. And therefore it was easy to start to vote for the anti-parties. It was easier to say, I agree with that one issue party and therefore I will vote for my member to do that, even though you're not interested in the outcome and you might not like the outcome. I give you one statistic. If all the young people in the UK had voted, UK would still be a member of the European Union. 86% of older people voted, 36% of young people voted. And if that is not an example to all of us of how voting matters and can impact you, because who's mostly impacted? Young people are impacted by Brexit. People. My sister works in the medical field. She works in the UK. She's like, we cannot find work. You know, there are people, we are desperate, it's very difficult. Economically, we are losing out. Also, Europe is losing out from having the intellectual expertise and information of the UK to bring to the table. So how do we resolve this? Different types of campaign. Elections are different to how they used to be. Before, we used to go to events in different localities. Now it's online. But I need to make sure that what I'm saying or what my colleague is saying, even if we're saying completely different things, but at least we're not a bot, gets to you. And if my children, I mentioned this, so my son will vote for the first time. I mean, I hope he votes for me. But, I mean, I hope so. But, okay, but I need to make sure. And I ask him, like, do you see my feed? And I was like, yeah, because my friend sent me screenshots and it's embarrassing. That was his answer. But when I told him, listen, because he's mostly, I mean, as you can imagine, on TikTok, I guess like you all are. I'm not yet. But is that kind of propaganda, disinformation, flash voting styles might supersede what we do. And we need to combat that. And then we become a little bit more exciting, more interesting. We become a bit more controversial, but as long as you feel us, because you might not. And if you might not, it's our responsibility. But we only do it because we need to communicate our message, and then I ask you to vote in return. And in some countries, we have less than 20% of people voting. Right? For all elections, not for the European elections. 20%, couldn't care less. Because they say all politicians are the same, but they are not. They are not. We are looking at a potential development in June, where the far right is so big that the majorities that we have in the center are no longer possible. Huh? It's not scaremongering. I don't want to scaremonger, because if I do, I would not be doing my job. I would rather like to provide an alternative to convince you to vote otherwise. Because otherwise it will not work. We saw what happened in the Netherlands. Now, Manfred Weber. That was, in a way, Max asked this question, and Gabrielle, I will come back. So, if we talk about, and that was a big discussion, and of course the word fences was used. It was not only him, it was predominantly the leaders of the Baltic states that were facing a hybrid attack from Belarus, where people were being flown in through Istanbul from Iran, etc., and pushed into the border, that those countries say, we have no option but to build what is called a permanent border infrastructure. In other words, that you have an infrastructure, and at every 100 meters or so, you have the possibility to apply or to enter, to get your papers checked. I can tell you, at the moment, the Finnish-Russian border is completely closed. Is that a fence? Yes, that's a fence. There is a fence between Spain and Morocco. But I answer it in another way. I say, look, how are we going to make sure that our border procedures are fair, and that you do not die at the border or trying to enter the European Union? If you come from an island in the sea, there are no borders, there are no possibility of fences there. So you need to make sure that those traffickers that are preying on the most vulnerable people on the planet, putting them on boats, facing an almost certain death, have their business model dismantled. But at the same time, we need to couple that with a policy whereby we see that we can give protection. The Obama administration, a long time ago, used to have a policy whereby people would be identified as needing protection, would be taken into the US. That's no longer really the case, and very few member states of the European Union do it. So we have found ourselves in a situation where there's no option for you to seek protection except for you to physically enter the European Union by walking onto it. And then you are rejected because you come from a country which is considered safe. So that's a policy that doesn't work. It's not easy, but I think that with this final last pact that we agreed in December, we found a delicate balance, and hopefully it can be implemented to protect and save lives. That, for me, is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, behind each person, you know, we become desensitized when we talk about big numbers. Oh, tens of thousands are coming. 1 million came. We forget behind every single number, there's a dream. One person hoping for a better life. And a family back home that has paid everything for that person to find a better life, only for them to find out that he has drowned on the way. That's the biggest tragedy we have in the European Union. And I think we owe it to ourselves, all of us, to do better. On China, so our position of Europe is very clear. One China policy, keep the status quo, do not touch Taiwan. Lithuania went a little bit further. Nancy Pelosi went a bit further. You will recall she went by plane. We have a very good relationship with Taiwan. Taiwan is one of the largest manufacturers of semiconductors, so there's a big direct importation. And the US and Europe has been very clear, you know, that China should not touch or go even 1 inch into the strait that separates the mainland from the island. Presidential elections last week in Taiwan, that meant that it was a pro-independence candidate that won. a lower number than previous election. But there, I think we need to couple that with us and the policy that we have in terms of rather than decoupling but de-risking from China, because our economic relationship is what it is. Our businesses depend on critical raw materials. Importation is that me? Our importation is what it is, and exportation as well. So the car industry, German car industry, huge. While at the same time, I think, and here I will link it to the last question on Trump, is that we need to realize that we can no longer depend on somebody else to come to our defense when things go wrong. That is strategic autonomy when we call it that. And that means that we can be able to move forward irrespective of the US administration across the Atlantic. Now, we have always worked with administrations, different levels, of course. At the moment, it's very good. But make no mistake, we have had to also find a way to react to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is essentially a huge dumping of investment money into the US economy. How do we combat that? How do we counter that with a similar way? We have a very defederalized way of doing things. We don't like state aid, but at the same time, if you're a rich country, you can afford it. If you're a poor country, you can't. And Maria, in fact, coming back to you, it also makes a difference which country you come from. So I've, when I went to Moldova, every person I met wants to enter the European Union, and they would be desperate to get a vote to vote in the European Parliament. And what I thought going back, I said, you see, we take our vote for granted. We just don't say it enough. So I will not be afraid of what will happen in November, understanding that there could be consequences instead of in terms of a new US-Russia axis, but I will wait and see. And in the meantime, I will work for as long as we can in order to make Europe stronger and able to act independently, if I can say, in an interdependent world. But so far, we have shown that we could do better at that.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for these many insights. I think it will be your call now on whether we can still have a very short last round of 2 or 3 questions, because I see that there were a number of students that raised their hands a couple of times. So, 1 question. 1 question, that's going to be difficult. Well, in this case, I think it would be the student in the very last row in the center, because you have been meaning to say something for quite a while. And maybe if it's a very short question, then we can...
Thank you. I'm Alice. I wanted to ask if all the institution that young people created as the Youth Parliament or MUNs, MEPs, etc., if those resolutions are read and if they're taken in consideration, and what do you do with these?
Okay, 1 more.
Thank you, Alice.
We can do 1 more. We can go to the front, yeah?
So my name is Anna, and I have a question about democracy. Would you state that the EU is currently effectively defending the principle of democracy, with some countries, for example, Italy, having rising authoritarian regimes?
So on the resolutions, I will say that the European Parliament is your best friend here. Alice, right, Alice? Because we have a unit dedicated to looking at your proposals. We have a culture committee that really dedicates its work to making sure that your proposals come through. I would like to see in the next commission more dedicated parts to youth. And of course, the answer is youth is a cross-cutting, let's say, a cross-cutting subject because it hits everyone. It's like, do you do children's rights, etc. But for me, I think that especially now, because we have a different types of generation coming up that are perhaps more disaffected, more isolated, more marginalized than before, we need to renew our focus. So we ask a lot for always increased funds to go for these kind of programs, whether it's EPAS or Erasmus, etc. What I would like us is to have that much more broadly experienced by more young people than just you. And that I think we could do more as a parliament. But make no mistake, and this is where you could also help in the next few months where we are setting up the new institutions, write to your members to push your demands, especially after the Conference on the Future of Europe, where a lot of youth were involved and a lot of demands were done, and I wish that there was a bit better response, frankly. From the Parliament there was. Democracy. Well, the Parliament, you know, we call ourselves the House of Democracy, and we really take rule of law seriously. So wherever there is a country where we think things are going sideways, whenever we think that media is not being respected, the courts are not functioning well, minorities are targeted, then we trigger procedures. Do we do it quickly enough? No, not always. Should we have more powers as a parliament to push the Commission to do more? There is a specific article in the treaty called Article 7, needs more beef, absolutely. But if I compare to when I arrived in Parliament 10 years ago to today, we have improved a lot. Last week we had a very critical resolution on Slovakia. We have had in the past on Poland, on Malta, my own country, where a journalist was assassinated, where institutions don't work to protect their citizens. Then the Parliament can really be the beacon of democracy. And I have no doubt that in the next 5 years, the new Parliament will do the same. All right, now I really need to go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for this very short but very rich exchange, especially in terms of the number of different topics that we have been able to raise. So many thanks to the school for organizing this, for the liaison office of the European Parliament, and of course to Roberta, to you and your team. I think now is the time to have a group picture here in the room, and we will also hear the European anthem.
Picture from here, huh?
Yeah. Okay. Non, ça va pas être possible. Est-ce que tu peux te reculer que je puisse avoir la group picture?
C'est tellement large.
Bah oui, c'est tout le monde. Maybe not this one. Can you squeeze a little? Yeah. Normally.
Let's take a mic and sing. Yeah, sure. It's not like it's still on. Come on, mic. Who? It's still on. Wieso ist einfach so, ja, die kriegt das lang. So krass. Ja, bist du was? Die also,